3 items that's on the closed session, but if we can concur on consent items, first of all, for consent items, we have a request to continue number 8, and I'd ask that while that 1-week continuance, whether that should go back to public safety because they are altering, looks like altering the direction of the grant. So we can ask the CLA to look into that to find out if it should go back to public safety before it comes to us. But if we can continue 8 with those directions and consent on 5, 9, 10, 11, and 12, and we have some verbal amendments to 12 for some account numbers. Okay. All right. On number 5, we're going to move the ordinance. On number 8, that's going to be continued with those directions. Number 9, approve the Board of Bureau of Public Works recommendation. Number 10, concur with the ad hoc committee on public debt. 11, note and file the CAO's report, but ask LAPD-ITA to report back in 30 days on their strategies to upgrade the technology and provide the OIS claims information as requested by this committee. And then number 12, we have asked the CAO have some instructions on accounts, I believe. We have the CA.
That's the game. Oh, issue.
We understand there's some new account numbers for item 2, 3, and 6.
Yes.
Could you give those to the?
Sure.
Okay. Due to the changeover to the new fiscal year, the following technical amendments have been made to the CAO report. Recommendation number 2, which is authorizing my resolution for new exempt positions in the mayor's office for the period of July 1st, 2008 through June 30th, 2009, subject to allocation by the Civil Service Commission. Recommendation number 3, instruct the city administrative officer to include the 4 mayoral aide 5 positions in the mayor's office. Personnel account authority resolution for the remainder of the grant period, July 1st, 2009 through September 30th, 2009. Recommendation number 6, authorize the controller to establish a new fund entitled Gang Prevention Coordination Assistance Fund, number XXX, Department 46. Recognize a receivable in the amount of $200,000 and set up appropriation accounts as follows, and those appropriation accounts should begin with the alphabet letter E. That was the change made there. And then A, as grant funds are received, transfer up to $128,000 from the Gang Prevention Coordination Assistance Program Fund number XXX, Department 46, appropriation account number E146 to fund number 100, Department 46, account 1020, salaries grant reimbursed. Then B, upon presentation of documentation and proper demand by the mayor's office, transfer up to $20,000 from the Gang Prevention Coordination Assistance Fund number XXX, Department 46, appropriation account number E905 to fund number 100, Department 22, account number 3040 for ISIS web-based tracking services. And C, as grant funds are received, transfer $12,800 from the Gang Prevention Coordination Assistance Program Fund number XXX, Department 46, appropriation account number E908 to fund number 100, Department 46, account number 1020, salaries grant reimbursed.
Okay. And could you make sure we get that in writing so the clerk can add that to the report?
Yes.
And I'd also ask a direction be added to the report that the CAO include and our financial status report, an accounting of all funds spent from the gang development and youth development allocations for 0809 and the adopted budget, to show us the amount authorized, the amount encumbered, and also expended, and the purpose and details of those allocations. So if we can add that instruction, I'd appreciate it. Okay, so those are our consent items. With those changes, we'll go into closed session on items 1, 2, and 3 and return with the regular agenda.
Okay, first, we have item number 4, which is a Chief Legislative Analyst, City Administrative Officer joint report relative to the Los Angeles Triathlon, and a request to extend the contract with Pacific Sports to produce the Los Angeles Triathlon.
Good afternoon.
Your life's work here.
Gonna name it after you.
You know, that's pretty sad if this is my life's work. What would you like to know?
Well, just give us a thumbnail. We've had a lot of discussion on this. We gave you some tasks
Yes.
at the last meeting. It seems like we got many of them resolved, and so...
Yes, you'll recall you had several meetings regarding the triathlon and whether or not to negotiate with the current contractor, Pacific Sports, to try to extend the agreement, or whether or not it would be in the city's interest to issue an RFP. At your last meeting, the action that you recommended to the council and they adopted was to ask Pacific Sports to work with USA Triathlon to see if they could get something in writing saying that if they followed all the guidelines, that USA Triathlon would in fact sanction the Los Angeles Triathlon if they were the contractor. Within that 45-day period that the council allowed them, USA Triathlon did in fact submit such a letter to the city saying that they Pacific Sports currently would qualify based on what is known at this point, and if they continued to maintain everything in accordance with their guidelines, that they anticipated that the 2008 event would be sanctioned.
Okay.
And that's basically what the council was looking for.
Okay. So we're at now recommending that we move forward and negotiate with them what length of contract?
We are recommending a 3-year with an option for a 2-year renewal, so it would be a total of 5 years.
And that option is the city's option?
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask a couple of things, is that when we talk about this sanction, it's written somewhere that this sanction shall remain throughout the life of the contract?
Well, every year they have to reapply for
I
the
mean,
sanction.
but I want to make sure that if we agree to 3 and 2, that we don't get in the middle of it and find the sanction went away. And, I mean, is that a reopener for us if they're not sanctioned?
Right, that would be one of the conditions of the contract, that they have to maintain this,
They have to
otherwise
maintain
they
it,
breached.
Or that would be a reopener for the city?
Yes.
Okay. And then when we talk about the full cost recovery, is that the model we're using for the marathon, or is there a different model?
The anticipated model is the marathon model, where the actual day of the triathlon, the city's incremental costs over any other Sunday during that month
Okay.
would be paid by Pacific Sports.
Okay. And then the issue that we didn't contemplate when we dealt with the marathon's last contract, if this is sold, is there a reopener or some language to protect the city? If the race is sold to another entity?
We could include that, yes.
Okay. And then, do we have any other reopeners in behalf of the city as far as them complying, or just any non-compliance, such as failure to pay or whatever? Are those all reopeners?
I would anticipate that they would be considered a breach. They would have an opportunity to cure the breach.
Okay.
But if they don't, then the city, the contract would be null and void, and then the city could.
The one thing we found in the, and I think an issue of payment, that in the marathon contract, we never explored interest if failure to pay.
It's our intent to negotiate that as well.
No questions.
Okay. Greg, you got anything?
Yeah, just, this is like a new day, isn't it, from where we were on this?
Yes, it is.
So we feel pretty comfortable that all the terms have been negotiated out. Is the vendor here by chance? Or his rep?
His
I'd like to ask him
representative
a
is
question
here.
if I could.
I just wanted to clarify that none of this has been negotiated yet. These are recommended negotiation points at a minimum that staff would like to have in place in terms of a negotiation.
Very
So
good.
you're requesting us to give you permission to negotiate?
Yes, for 60, no more than 60 days.
So we're going to see this again.
Hi,
Hi, Victor Franco with Econet, representing Pacific Sports.
and how do you feel about all this?
Well, I think we feel really good. We appreciate the opportunity. I think that's what we've kind of wanted all along, just the opportunity to renegotiate with the city and put on an outstanding event. Just to touch on the sanctioning issue, USA Triathlon doesn't have a mechanism where you can sanction, say, for 3 or 4 years at a time. It's basically every year you need to reapply with them prior to their event, and they kind of just review what you've been doing. As long as you're following the guidelines, and we would, again, get sanctioning.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that when that process occurs, that the city's aware of it, whether it's before or after the triathlon, so that we're aware that you're always sanctioned, and it's part of the agreement in the contract that that's a requirement, that
Sure.
you stay sanctioned.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll move that item in 60 days for the negotiation, and we'll be getting the contract back here if that's successful.
Yes.
If we're not successful, then your proposal is that we go off RFP?
Right, and then we would return with the recommended proposer based on that competitive process.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We'll move that item with those amendments.
Okay, next we have item numbers 6 and 7, both dealing with achievements. Item 6 is the city clerk's report relative to the notification process for achievement of unclaimed property. And item number 7 is the city treasurer's report relative to a request from the Los Angeles Police Department to escheat $340,000 from their unclaimed monies seized incidental to arrest trust fund to the city general fund.
Good afternoon. Yeah. Let me just ask some questions. I think we've gone over this a number of times. The one thing I appreciate that you've gone through and looked at a variety of ways to expose people to this information. And as we mentioned for item 6, the original concern was that the likelihood is few people that are in our custody read the Daily Journal. So we're looking for ways to put that in a different fashion. One thing I was going to ask, did we explore any, and it was just a thought, have we explored a connection with locations that the city has jails as a means of where you would focus that attention, just the same as bail bondsmen focus around where there's jails, people that leave their property with the city, that's where they would normally have their property taken from them. So if it's not recovered, generally they would go back, I would assume, to the jail that they were booked. Did we look at that at all as a point of finding a way to notify the community in the vicinity of where the city has jails located?
I know Treasury did not. I'm not aware of any others, if City Clerk perhaps.
Because I'm just trying to figure out whether we can, whether we can narrow it down rather than a broad brush of saying the LA Times and or something, or say neighborhood councils, or we're trying to figure out whether there is a consistency. And I think, what is it, 6 or 7 jails are in the city. That's where people would have their property recovered from them. When they're transferred, it goes to other places, but it may be the point of contact of saying in the general area of the jail, it'd be an area in which we'd use local newspapers to identify the area. The other thing I was going to bring up is that so that it's not necessarily a cost to the city, the likelihood is we'll never have an achievement where all the money is sent back to those who left it, so that if we paid the bill for the outreach through the achievement funds that are recovered, then it's no impact on the general fund, other than be less achievement funds, as opposed to us having to create a vehicle to pay. Can we do that, or is that?
It's a council policy decision, so
Yeah.
at your say-so, that's exactly what we would do.
So the notice, and I know there's a difference between, this is unclaimed, this is related to individuals who've been arrested, but does a notice go out from the city to the individual who was arrested? We have your property, right? And
I could not answer that. That would be the
Police department.
police department. We just get the instruction from the police department that this is the total amount of funds that are being held, and if we could process.
Harry?
Bernard
said, bring Harry up here.
Harry was looking behind you, so we thought it'd be great.
Because the question is, you know, if you, and this is a little bit different than some others where you try to find someone and you can't. And I notice now there's a reality TV show that's trying to find people, give them money. Maybe we could make some money off of that if we did it. But I think if you, and reading this notice as attached here, it says that for now, then 3 years past, they remained unclaimed with the police department. Doesn't say who's unclaimed or anything. It just says if you happen to look and you have unclaimed property,
They don't come back.
yeah, if they don't come back.
Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you, and the staff that's here on item number 7 doesn't know specifically. I would suspect that we do some sort of outreach with the information that we have on the arrestee as far as sending some sort of a notice. I can certainly get back to the committee on that.
So that would be great. Again, there's some unfortunate that, you know, may have been a homeless person, for example, who had some of their things. I don't know how you would necessarily be able to identify that, but if there's questions we can ask or data we can collect when they're arrested. So I'm just curious as to the process before we...
Yeah, and I just take a step further, because I see they publish it in this journal and that journal. Do they have the name of the person and their phone number whose property it was? And do you know if the procedure would be to call the person and say, hey, Joe Schmo, I got your da-da-da-da?
My understanding is by the time it hits the treasurer's office, they've taken, the police department has taken all means necessary to try and contact and locate whoever it was. But by the time that it hits the
Trying to
treasurer's
understand what it
office,
gets you. Do they keep a ledger of that? They call Joe Schmo at X
it would have to be the
number?
police department.
Can
It's
we
not
somehow
identified
get
by
that
the time it hits the
process
treasurer's
before
office.
it gets to you, so that we have those answers?
That would seem reasonable to me. Let me check with our staff.
Yeah, Harry,
It
you
doesn't
can-
say
yeah.
here, it just says, you know.
If you can get that
general.
before it comes to council and tell us what the process. 'Cause
Absolutely.
the issue of whether we do make a notification, or is it just anybody's property that's there 3 years and they've not contacted us and we move it forward? That's where it's unclear.
Yeah.
Will do.
Okay.
Because I would read this, and I would have no idea.
The one thing on item 7, I wouldn't like to move on item 7 until we figure out what are the processes in item 6 that will go in place so that all future requests are handled by the new process. And so is there a problem with the time delay?
Other than this is money that's
Money
not-
that we're trying to get? Okay, let me ask, when is our next budget finance meeting? Okay, let's do this. If we can hold these 2 items and ask the police department to come in with what the process is, and that way we can move them both forward with the new process, and then how number 7 is going to be impacted by the new process. So if you could look at that whole issue of whether it makes sense as it relates to places in which we have jails, is that a reasonable concentration point of notification? Or if Harry finds out we're sending directed letters to them, it might not need that level of concentration. But we need to know that so that we'll have a better idea. And so if we move hold item 6 and 7 for that additional information, then we can address both of them next week.
Some of them might unfortunately be incarcerated,
Yeah.
won't respond.
Yeah.
They definitely aren't reading the Daily Journal if they're incarcerated, so they would miss that.
Nothing else to do.
Yeah.
So, if we get that information, we'll address them next Monday. Thank you.
Okay, next, we have item number 13, which is continued from July 14th, 2008, which is a motion from Parks Gruel relative to a discussion with the city controller, CAO, and the CLA concerning the controller's memorandum dated June 12, 2008, addressed to all general managers relative to the potential cancellation of encumbrances.
If we can have 13 and 14 together so we get briefed on both of those.
Okay, and item number 14 is a continued item from the July 14th meeting, which is a CAO report relative to the governor's 2008-09 May revised to the proposed 2008-09 state budget and potential city impacts.
Good afternoon. I'm Bill Lamb from the Controller. After the week, the closing is progressing. It looks like we will not have to cancel encumbrances on a wholesale basis, but it also looks like the reversion to the reserve fund will be less than $10 million. We're still working on the figures, and we should have definitive figures by next Monday.
Now, what was the 10 million was what now?
The reversions to the reserve fund from the general fund will be less than $10 million.
And what was that on the budget? What did we budget?
I think it was $37 million.
But the change from, it was about 40 to 50 million we were concerned about over expenditure, and now we're down to 27. Not good still, but
Right.
there's a difference between the 27 and the 40 to 50.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
Less than 10 million on the reversions, 27 million on the shortfall, and you said we will not have wholesale cancellation of income.
No, we may have some in individual departments where the departments exceeded their authority, but it'll be minor.
Okay, and this is more crystallized, we think this is about where we're going to end up?
Think as an order of magnitude, it's a good order of magnitude. So we think it will be less than 10 million.
When you mean good order of magnitude, you mean it's
The correct range. It won't be significantly greater.
than that?
Yeah, these are our guidelines.
Right, as to, and I guess the question is whether or not, one of the issues was whether or not we should change any of our policies, and particularly on the encumbrances, at this point in time, today, with the numbers that we know about, which is instead of 37 million being reverted to the reserve fund, only 10 million being reserved, sent to the reserve fund.
I think there's going to have to be some consideration of the budget going forward, but at this point, what we're talking about is the impact at June 30th and July 1. The other thing that is still up in the air is the amount of reappropriations, because we still don't have a good figure on the budgeted reappropriations.
Budgeted, explain what you mean by that.
The budget provides that certain items in the budget that are not wholly expended, the unexpended appropriation gets reappropriated in the following year, and that's tied to the appropriations and the difference between appropriations. So you can have a situation where the reversions to the reserve fund is less than anticipated, but the reappropriations are greater than anticipated.
Could they be reverting, or could they be reappropriating funds that we thought were going to be reverted?
They could be, but the difference is the reversions are technically cash. The reappropriations are technically the difference between the appropriation and what was committed during the process. And so in this case, the amount of cash that goes back to the reserve fund is less, but the amount of appropriations that are reappropriation could be greater.
So what you're saying is, sorry, so we appropriate 10 million, let's just say,
Correct.
for the CAO's budget for some special project, and they don't spend 10 million.
Ray doesn't spend it all.
He doesn't spend it. He's really frugal, he spends 5 million. So it's not really cash because we haven't given it to him yet, but
Right.
but now he's only spending 5 million. So that extra 5 million is going to be used for our next year. Ray may want that extra 5
Correct.
million to reappropriate to him, but we can reappropriate it to the general fund. And you're saying that there's a portion of the budget from last year where people were appropriated, didn't spend it, can now be used somehow.
Right. There's an item in the budget resolution that says certain funds, mainly capital improvement funds, that are not expended against the appropriation are reappropriated in the subsequent budget year.
But those are directed by the committee and the council, not that they could do that on their own.
Right.
No, the departments can't do it on their own. It's following the budget.
So if we have a budget deficit already looming for this year, i.e. $27 million that we thought was going to go to the reserve fund, we could put that $5 million that Ray's not spent, not reappropriate it to him, but reappropriate it to the reserve fund.
No, because it's already gone. What goes to the reserve fund is just cash, so it's the excess cash, or the cash that was not there. What we've got are two different budgetary concepts. The budget provides that for the general fund, departments can expend up to their appropriation level. There's no requirement on cash. This year, since the revenue was down, we didn't have the cash that we'd anticipated. The budget also provides, independent of the cash, that certain items that are appropriated, that are not completely liquidated during the course of the year, become appropriations for the next year.
I understand that. I understand that. But we oftentimes during the year will move funds to the reserve fund because the revenue is comes in greater than we anticipated. We anticipate a problem. So I understand that one's cash and one's appropriations, but it's still part of our overall budget.
Correct.
Okay. So I guess where Mr. Parks is going too, which is if you're saying that there's I don't know how much money was not fully spent or fully appropriated last year, that could also help us. And I guess I'm trying to figure out what that amount is.
No, because that's actually a liability, it's not an asset. Because what we're talking about there is it's basically our appropriations weren't fully backed by cash. So these are appropriations that will serve to deplete the reserve fund to the extent that it is the reappropriation is excess over and above that which was anticipated in the budget. So
I guess what I'm saying is, let's go back to my example. I've got you at the same look, because I thought maybe I was dense today. So it's not you, it's just us understanding. But what I'm saying is, we appropriated this much money to Ray Serrano's CAO last year, and he didn't, either one, he didn't spend all of it, or he spent half of it. And now, in this next year, you would like to reappropriate it back to Ray, and we're saying on a policy decision, just like encumbrances, we don't want to give it back. We want to keep it for some other issue now. If it was a police, if it was a capital expenditure that we have, responsibilities or an agreement with, that's a different thing from, we're just not spending the full amount.
I've been having this discussion with a lot of people over the last several days. And
Not just me, okay, sure.
it's gotten to the point where I'm not sure I know what I'm talking about anymore. But basically, what has happened is that appropriation is not backed by cash. It's not backed by money. And so the amount of money that is there that will revert is less than $10 million. So now what we're talking about is appropriations that are not backed by money, that to the extent that they exceed the current year budget, that reappropriations occur, those are appropriations that would drain the reserve fund, because that's the source of the cash.
So you're saying if we move it the next year, it's just an allocation we have to find general fund money for?
Or it comes out of the reserve fund.
That's it. I get that we have to find $27 million.
That's
That's what he said.
next year.
That's not real money. That's unspent.
It's after
Basically, our wish list. Now we gotta find money,
Or we don't fund it.
or it doesn't happen.
Okay.
Correct.
So it's not real money.
Just wanted to just sort of make sure I was straight as well on this, but I think basically with Bill, if I can perhaps sum this up real
This country
quickly.
for English is very slow.
It's Monday afternoon, and unfortunately I've given up my money and won't get it back from last year, so I've,
Just so we
So
know.
that grant unit's not gonna come.
but no, wait a minute, no. I think there's a couple different concepts here. I think what Bill was just trying to explain is that in the budget and through the year in FSR, there's money that we expect that would revert that we're going to reappropriate. That estimate is higher than what we had anticipated in the budget. I don't know exactly what that number is, but that's basically FMIS, some of the money that was in GCP 7.3 we expect. A lot of it's the CIP money from last year. So there's money in GCP, things of that sort, which basically the money from last year, that money is higher, and so those reappropriations will be higher than budget. The flip side, I shouldn't say so much the flip side, there's also the piece as far as actual reversions, and basically between the revenue and reversions, we are going to be down by what we expected. I think at this point the reserve fund is going to start the year somewhere in between 160 and 170, depending on final numbers, and that's
$27 million less
than what we anticipated.
than anticipated. So we just start off with less in our reserve fund.
That's correct. Now, certainly at this stage in the game, we can certainly discuss all of the reappropriations. If we want to bring those back in the committee, we can discuss them. It is sort of a decision to this committee whether they wanted to rehash those.
Do you know which ones those are? I mean, do you have a list?
I think, yes, we do. We have a pretty good idea what they are.
I think that's where we want to be able to, from a policy perspective, say, yes, we're right, we know the reserve fund is going to go down 27 million, or here are some policy decisions that we're going to change and we won't expend this year in the cash, but instead go into the reserve fund.
The other thing I'm wondering about too is on the reversions. What would be the reason that the reversions come in so much lower than what we projected? Is that strictly from the cash flow and the revenue not coming in?
I think, and I was just conferring with Bill, it's basically that 10, actual reversions, Bill was talking about reversions backed by cash. And basically, we anticipated quite a bit more. It only looks like there's about 10 million that's backed by cash. So this, as Bill kind of tried to explain in a little bit round number, that basically total reversions backed by cash can be less than 10 million.
But we projected, what,
I think we were looking, 37.
37? why would there be that 27 million difference on the?
It's simply because we didn't have the revenue. That's the big piece.
So that ties with the gap
Yes,
Right.
as far as the structural deficit.
that's correct.
And did you provide to us, I know we talked in a general sense last week of where the money, or not when it was, but where the money, where we lost the revenue. So for example, the property tax, which we thought was going to be problematic, is in fact only 70,000 or something, I can't remember what it was, or a lot less than we'd anticipated. And there was a couple others, business tax, less revenue, first time in many years that we saw less revenue.
Yes, and we actually have a little sheet. I think it's one I have from last year. It's almost final, but it's roughly the $28 million where we're short, yes.
What are the highest ones where we lost revenue?
It was the property tax, which was roughly a little over 17 million. We had the license permit fees category was 17.5. We had the documentary transfer was 8.2. The vehicle license fee, we're down 2.5. But we were up in some categories, the TOT, parking fines, and the parking users tax as well. So we can provide a list of the revenues.
Parking one, we were going to be down on that, based on revenue. Is that for the next year that we're down?
I think there's there might be a concern for next year, but for last year, we were to the good.
Yes, on the reversions, is that also a figure that we talked about during the budget that deals with our reserve fund loans? Are those loans not being paid that we projected? Is that part of the shortfall in the reversions also?
The reserve fund loans are part of the calculation when we look at the reserve fund balance. At this point, I don't know what has come in versus what we budgeted, but the reversions are simply, dollars from, say, my budget that I let go and didn't spend.
In fact, one of the things I think we asked in the budget committee was that we look for this coming year with maybe a little more rigid line on reserve fund loans during the year, and that we seriously look at those that deal with those grants that we often are unclear when the money's coming in, and then also ask that we found out late in the budget year that there was a fund in, I believe, the police department where they had several $1 million of returned reserve fund loans that had gone to their fund as opposed to back to the general fund, and we're going to find if there's any other funds like that throughout the city. That's why we're waiting for that return on the reserve fund loan. It's sitting in an account within their department, and so we need to make sure that we clean those things up. And as we move forward on this year, fiscal year, that we're able to really look strongly at these loans very, very seriously, of whether we have an exact timeline of when they're coming back, and also the issue of whether departments are using it as a priority to bill these outside agencies to get money back as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I also wanted to make one recommendation that because of the uncertainty of where we are at this point in the fiscal year in terms of revenue coming in and where our reserve fund's going to be, that as the CLA and CAO and the mayor's office look at exemptions from the managed hiring, as we look at the exemptions that are requested to fill positions from departments, what the CLA has started asking is for, if it is the highest priority of a department to fill a particular position that's not health or safety related, we are asking for the department to designate what positions they're going to hold vacant of an equal amount until all of this is settled and we see going forward, because there may be the requirement to reduce appropriations as we go forward.
I think that's part of them. We've asked them over and over during the budget what their priorities are, and I think that's a carryover, that if they think and the one thing we stayed away from the freezes, because with a freeze, we treat an assistant general manager the same as an entry-level clerk. So if they are in the managed hiring needing a position that they believe is high level and runs an operation. The next issue is, how are they going to save money within their budget? Are they going to hold X number of positions to fund that? And then, as we monitor their funds throughout the year, there may be ability to slack up a little bit or continue down the managed hiring. But I think it's, rather than us make the decision as to what's important, it puts it on their shoulders to decide what are their priorities that help them run their departments.
Right, so all we're asking for is fiscal responsibility, but we're not trying to manage.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any comments on item 14 on the
Todd Bowie with the CAO. There hasn't been very much good news along those lines. And last week, as you probably know, the LA Times has some quotes from the governor indicating the potential taking of local transportation funds by state legislators to the tune of maybe as much as $2.5 billion. And so taking this level of funding at the state would have a significant impact on the city, particularly to street services programs. The mayor sent correspondence to the governor imploring against the use of local funds to balance the state budget. And though aside from those transportation funds, we also have to be concerned about other local revenues that may be reviewed or impacted, including VLF, property tax, redevelopment funds, some things that we looked at a little bit earlier in this process that we thought maybe were off the table at one point. But at this point, it seems that maybe everything is on the table as they kind of reach some consensus on an impasse that they have over raising taxes versus cutting services. So more information will be reported as it becomes available. We don't have anything definitive from the legislature yet. They haven't reported what they're going to do, and I believe actually they're in somewhat of a recess. But hopefully, as the cash flow crisis comes to a head here, they'll have something soon.
Now, one thing, I want to make sure everybody got a copy of this League of California Cities. Have you gotten that alert that they put out?
Yes.
Yes.
So that's something in which they're asking for cities and regular community to really emphasize this whole issue of the Prop, 1C in 204 and 206, those mandates that are basically the state was promised not to take the money without a declared emergency. And as of yet, there's not been a declared emergency, but they're talking about moving those housing and transportation funds. And so,
I think there's a big concern on our part. We don't have anything definitive, but yet what's trickling out is I'll call very disturbing. And I think we need to, as the mayor has put together a letter and sent up to the governor, I think it would be helpful for many of our elected officials to get on the phone and call, because
I think you made a
it's
motion to have us go in opposition to that.
Yeah.
The council, I don't know when that's coming
yeah,
forward.
I think
That would be great.
for tomorrow to use this League of Cities as a guideline.
I think that would be very helpful. I'm concerned with some of the data that's trickling out, and if things come to fruition and they spring something on us, it's going to be challenging for us and all local government.
Yeah. Now, do we have any, even with all this, that they're doing a taking, have we have any sense of the unfunded mandates? Is that on the rise also for this coming year? Or do we know at all what they might be?
I'm not aware of any of the mandates, requirements as far as that changing, on their requirements on us changing, on things coming into effect. I can follow up on that.
Because last year I thought it was several million that they pushed down to us without, and now they're talking about taking money that's coming to us, and then if you multiply.
Certainly, we are not. I don't believe we're expecting any reimbursement from many of the mandates. As you just mentioned, the bigger concern now is what they might be taking.
Okay, all right. Any other questions on item 14, 13?
No, I think, we have to be moving forward, and I know the mayor's office tried to keep us somewhat informed, but that we need CLA and others, and CAO, to keep us in the loop of what you're hearing and being reported other than what we're reading the Times. So I think there was a reason we voted for 1A, which was to protect our dollars. And that clearly wasn't tight enough. Wasn't in the lockbox enough.
Unfortunately,
They kept an extra key.
I think so. There were just some extra loopholes in there, I think.
All right, well, like I said, we'll hold these two items again, so we can have a briefing next week to get updated. And I think we're going to have a motion for tomorrow that we asked the VOC to work on that follows somewhat the guideline of the California League of Cities alert. So we'll see that tomorrow. Next item.
Okay, lastly, we have item number 15, which is the CAO CLA joint report relative to convention center fee waiver subsidy policy.
Could you repeat that?
Sorry.
Greg fell off his chair over there.
It's a CAO CLA joint report relative. Yes.
Okay.
Well, as you know, this is sort of, when council adopted financial policy back in April 2005, we were also asked to report back on 4 additional pieces. One of our favorites, the special events, the development fees, convention center, and then below market lease agreements. We got the development through a while ago. This is sort of the special events, I believe, is still in committee. In Public Works. This is now the convention center that we have before you for discussion and hopefully adoption.
Okay. Now, what are the other ones that are remaining?
The other one was actually also the below market lease agreements.
Below, as far as city property?
Yes.
Okay. Because I think
basically all the $1 and et cetera lease.
Did General Services already put something together that was a pretty good guideline?
There were some things that have been drafted. GSD had put a good policy together. I think we had, our office had drafted something, but we haven't released anything formally. But we'll be happy to get that out.
Let me ask a couple of questions on this policy, and I think it's going in the right direction that we follow the developmental fee. Now, one of the things that for consistency, as we go through this policy, should we be referring to waivers versus subsidy as we go through it? Because we altered that in the developmental fee, that pretty much everything was a subsidy, and I thought there were some legal reasons for it.
I think we can refer this as a subsidy. The convention center is a little bit different arrangement than sort of a fee, strictly speaking, fee for service, but I think we had viewed this as a subsidy.
I believe there may be some oversight because the intent was when CLA and our office and the CAO met to discuss it was that in fact it would be presented as a subsidy and that it would be consistently so. So if there's something in the draft that refers to a waiver, it was just an oversight and we'll catch it.
All right, if we can catch that. The other thing I was going to ask is that when reading the policy, and I think it kind of falls on the, what was that, the prior policy, was it, what, 2004? The missing link is the enforcement or adherence to the policy. Is this going to be where the CAO is going to write a report each time one of these comes through and say it meets policy, does not meet policy, or recommends denial based on what's approved? Because that's going to be the whether it's successful or not is whether we enforce the 2004 or the 2008 policy. If it doesn't get enforced, we're right back in the same issue.
Very true. We have not put anything definitive in place, but I think we'd like to sort of maybe put together a very basic, I'll say a form that can be drafted and then reviewed by our office.
We can
very
jointly
quickly.
review them and get them to council.
But now, is there a committee? I mean, some of these do not go through committee, but I'm just trying to figure out for consistency, how does the CAO, CLA get access to these requests? Because many of them are just on motions that come back. They're not reports. How do we get the sense of whether it complies with the policy and whether somebody has exhausted their subsidy fund or whatever we have?
Well, I think when a request comes forward, that it then be referred to our offices.
Generally, with the development fee waiver subsidies, we've heard about them in advance, but I could see where there's a motion that's introduced for a convention center subsidy that, rather than being Rule 16, if it could be referred to our offices for a short report.
Because I think on developmental fees, they're generally going through a committee for the entitlements. And generally, that's how they're reviewed. These are somewhat a variety of ways they get to the council floor without going through a committee.
The other thing that we didn't have a specific recommendation in here, but the intent was that this policy be treated just like the other ones that, the other financial policies. The intent was that all of them would be codified within the code, which is different than the 2004 policy, which was a report but not codified. And I think that that will help in terms of the enforcement as well.
So a lot of these come in as Rule 16s.
Yes, they do.
Okay, so that makes it more difficult in which to ascertain that. And when I was reading the CLA notes, and then I hadn't seen the all the additions, I saw it a little bit later today. This is adopting an existing policy that we've clearly not followed. Is that correct?
Yes.
For the most part, yes.
Okay. And then it adds just the italics. Is that what you're saying? Is it the new is the italics, or the new is the?
The new was supposed to be the italics, yes. Sort of show the changes.
So very few italics in this. Okay.
Yes.
But fee waivers must be requested by council office and approved by the city council. Wasn't that what happened previously?
That's true.
So that one seems to be in italics in the report. Do you know why that would be?
I'm sorry, I missed
That's
that.
right, sorry, yes. It was saying all the changes from the existing policy,
Mhm.
many of which are not many. There's just a few that are
Just a
changes.
few, yes.
One was at item 8, fee waivers must be requested by council office and approved by city council. I thought that was already current policy.
I think
That's on page 3 of the report. Number 8.
I think it's making it more specific.
Yeah, I think there's
that a council office has to request it versus, I think it was silent on that point.
Before?
Yes.
I mean, it seemed like it was practice that a council office did it.
Right.
I don't know how many were not part of that.
And I think, one of the major changes from, and this is to make it consistent with the development fee waiver policy, is that these subsidies would be limited to nonprofit organizations that have budgets $5 million or less. That is something, a revision, as well as requiring a public benefit by allowing subsidies only for certain types of events, such as job fairs, training opportunities for low-skilled or low and moderate-income persons, educational seminars
And those
for
aren't-
low-skilled.
Okay, those aren't, but those don't seem like they're new. Those are existing ones that we just never enforced.
Actually, I'm sorry, those are
Those are
new.
new.
That is a new requirement.
Okay.
Public benefit.
The public benefit piece,
Maybe
yes.
if you could give, because the report says that the ones in italics are the new ones.
Yes, and that was just
So that was-
some
that should-
mishighlighting on my part.
Okay. Would you mind just when, if you can, just update that and tell me, which ones are the
Sure.
ones? And the $5 million thing is not in there either. At least I didn't see that.
I believe it is.
It's not, is it in the report? I don't see it.
budget.
The $5 million budget is,
The budget, the size of the nonprofit, I thought it was. I thought I read it earlier today.
It's,
Oh, here it is.
it's number
It's in
7.
here. It's on the recommendations. I apologize. It's on the next page. Okay. That's also not italicized. Maybe it would be helpful to have, these are the new revisions and these are the ones that are existing, so we kind of know what the changes are, because if I read this, I would think, oh, nothing's really, there's only a few
Okay.
things that are different.
we'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
Yep.
And I think Mr. Park's comment, which was the implementation of this and as it comes to council and whether or not it's in policy or out of policy, would be important as we're acting upon them in council. So we'll just get a new report
Just a
before it
couple
goes
of
to
quick
council.
questions then. And it might have been asked already, and I apologize if they have. Why is the convention center fee waiver policy being considered separately from the special event fee waiver policy? Just curious.
The nature of the charge is different. It's limited, obviously, to just the one department, the convention center, and the nature of the charge is different. It's a proprietary charge versus a more of a fee for service that we often impose on special events, and they're treated somewhat differently in the law.
Will there be a cap on the maximum fee waivers per year or not? We have a dollar figure in mind or a notion of what we're handling here?
I think where we're headed is basically the cap will be on the dollars available as far as to be subsidized.
Because the bottom line is you want the convention center to pick up those costs as part of their proprietary department, almost, ability. In other words, we don't want to waive fees if in fact, from a business perspective, they'll reimburse those fees or could reimburse. Do we have any of that mechanism in place with this? Say, for instance, we do a fee waiver because of some big something or another, but they end up making a lot of money on it. Is there some kind of a trigger that they would potentially pay back that fee waiver since they're money-making out for us here? And we're in the black.
The policy as presented addresses subsidy of fees for nonprofits that are below a certain size, $5 million or less in budget. So they're the ones that are receiving the waiver themselves, not the convention center. And in fact, the mechanism that is proposed is to make the convention center whole, where otherwise the council would choose to just forego that money.
No music drivers.
Right.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Because the for-profit, it doesn't tie the hands
No
of
waiver.
the convention center to negotiate with them the best deal and the market deal that's available.
Correct. You should be aware, and one of the reasons that I was discussing earlier, the need for this to be an ordinance, which we'll be happy to prepare once the council gives us the outline for it. That there are two other mechanisms already in the code for reductions of rental for potential clients, and those are TOT based. They have to be either compensated for by the TOT, where the general manager initiates that, or the other mechanism is where the LA Inc., Visitors and Convention Bureau, can also generate that for a convention.
Let me ask one other area that I think we were trying to resolve. We know that there's a number of, quote, citywide events, and although CD9 may get asked to do those and subsidize them, how do we break out, like, the job fair for the city, or these dollars for education that are not Ninth District events, but yet the district is asked to subsidize or get the approval for the use of the convention center, but it's really citywide, not district-wide. Do we have any way to break those out?
You know, I think we two things, if I may. I think we had looked at this as basically whoever is the requester is the one who will carry the request forward for review.
And my assumption is they'd also be using their subsidy fee.
That's correct. That is correct. They'd be using their own pot of money, per se. I think on the larger issue on what a citywide event is and how we would handle that, I think it still fall under the same constraints. Basically, there's the subsidy itself would be very small. I don't know let me back. As we looked at the special event, we thought about setting aside sort of a citywide, amount to deal with citywide issues. That's something that we can look at and perhaps address as part of that. I see most of these subsidies as being quite small. Don't know if they'd quite fall into that pot or not.
All right. And then let me ask on page 5, number 5, when we used reference on number 5 that the reimbursement would be city funds, general fund, or special funds, when we say general fund, we're referring to that subsidy.
That is correct.
Okay.
That would refer to the part of the $750,000 that's in GCP right now.
Okay. And then and then on page 3, the last paragraph, now you're going to monitor, the CEO is going to monitor the usage of this particular convention center through the financial
FSR.
status reports?
That's
So
correct.
you'll keep just, what, a running tally citywide, or?
Yes, we'll be working with CLA and keeping those totals.
Okay. All right, any other questions?
The department want to say anything?
Good afternoon, Philip Hill, Assistant General Manager, Convention Center. Just primarily, we are very much driven to drive this as a business, internally driven, not to mention that we're instructed by you, Council, to make this happen. This is just a component of the cost recovery nature of the process. Our intention is to be able to drive this as a business, to increase our market position, increase our market share, but also to ensure that we can run independently outside of the general fund. So this is just a component of that process.
Okay, thank you.
You approve of this, you're very happy.
So far, yes.
I think the mayor's office want to also make a comment as well.
Good afternoon, Ben Seha with the Mayor's Office. In general, we appreciate the effort the council has made and CLA and CAO have made in pushing forward the policy. There is one concern that we have relative to the recommendations, and that is recommendation number 9 that says fee waivers must be requested by council office and approved by the city council. Current practice, that is the case, but they still come to the mayor's office for his approval as well. And it's our understanding that to the extent that a request requires a transfer of funds, that still would be the case. But in the event that council exercise their discretion under recommendation number 8, which is to make exceptions to this waiver policy, and if that exception was not to request a transfer of funds, in that event, the file would never make it to the mayor's office. And that's a concern that we have, and I don't know if that's a correct understanding, but we'd like some clarification from the city attorney as to whether or not he believes that is the case.
Okay, so you're saying that a number, what is your objection, 8 or 9?
It's actually it's 9 in that this doesn't give kind of explicit direction as to whether or not any of this would require mayor's approval.
The current practice, as I understand it, is the actions even to waive a fee right now are sent to the mayor's office as well, are all subject to the approval of the mayor. The concern is that since this expresses the need only for council approval, that if the this rule or policy was suspended at any time, there would be a waiver that wouldn't have to go to the mayor for approval. And my understanding is that it wasn't the intent to change the practice at all, so that can be clarified, and we can include the mayor in approvals. These are budget-type actions, even when you make a waiver, so it would be appropriate to have the mayor approve.
So you recommend having it be consistent with
To keeping the same practice.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, so we'll move this item, and we just asked on the language cleanup for waiver versus subsidy, also that we add some language as to the enforcement, so that adherence to the rules, how the council will be made aware of in and out of policy, that we also clarify the language on the number 9 as to the practice of these items going to the mayor's office. And just on number 5, on page 5, if we can reference, instead of just general fund, be able to be more specific, the subsidy fund, so people know that it's not the larger general fund we're referring to as the subsidized funds. And then I think we need a little more clarity, Ray, on that, how citywide events, so that we will not have a situation to where, because it's located in the 9th district, they get the brunt of the request, and yet it's really a cash for college or something that's going on for a citywide effort. So we have to have some clarity there.
Okay.
And then, again, and I think clearly, like the other financial policies, that we would want them codified so that they're clearly established and as working principles.
Okay. So you'll include a request for the city attorney to prepare the ordinance and bring it back, and we will do that.
All right.
And then just making sure that we get an updated report
Yes.
that really clearly identifies what's existing.
Versus new.
Okay. So we'll move that item with those recommendations. Thank you.
Did you get that whole budget thing? I know what he was talking about.
Well, yeah, we got it. Okay, take care.
All right. So, if you have any questions, let me know. They talked a lot of things in there.
I'm just concerned about the state budget. I'm going to move to something back.